Okay, so let's move on to think about some of the practicalities then. So again, we talked a little bit about setting aside a time of day last week when you would pray. Is that the same kind of thing for reading the Bible?
Yes, absolutely. For me, I'm a morning person, so I much prefer to read my Bible first thing in the morning. I think it's when I'm at my best, and I like to try and give God my best where at all possible. If you're a night person, perhaps you might prefer to do it just before bed, and I do occasionally do that, but I think there's always the risk of being tired at the end of the day, or perhaps even laying in bed reading your Bible and perhaps falling asleep, so maybe not the best way. But yeah, so for me personally, I try to set aside time first thing in the morning to sit down with my Bible and to read it then. I think, as I say, that's when I'm at my best. It's when I'm, I think, personally most receptive to understand what the text is saying to me, and how I can then go ahead and apply that to my life that day.
And I think, I'm not a morning person. I'm a more of an evening person. But actually, I find that the morning is the best time to read the Bible. And I think there's a little quote. I think this is by John Bunyan, who was a preacher from about 400 years ago. He wrote The Pilgrim's Progress, which you may have heard of. Very good book, actually, worth reading. But he said, I think, whoever runs from God at the start of the day will scarce find him the rest of the day. And I just think, for me, like some people like to have a coffee at the start of the day, and it gets them going in the day. And for me, I like to start my day with reading the Bible. I tend to have a cup of tea actually, because I'm more of a tea person at that time of the day. But yeah, it's like you have your morning coffee, you have your Bible, and that gets you going and sets you up on the right frame of mind for the.
Definitely, and I think that we spend so much time getting ready for the day ahead, whether that's dressing or whatever it might be. But I think also it's really important to be ready spiritually by reading the scriptures and reading the Bible, by praying, so that we are ideally giving the day our best that we can. And I think I remember hearing someone say it's better to tune the instrument before the concert and not after, which is something that stuck with me as to why I do it in the morning. But
that's really good.
It doesn't work for everyone, of course. But.
Okay, so you're sitting there. You in the mornings you've got your coffee, whatever, got your Bible. So what do you do when you start reading the Bible? How do you go about kind of reading it so that it kind of you benefit?
Yeah, so for me, I like to. I tend to read my Bible on my app on the phone nowadays. I think that gives you lots of resources at your fingertips, lots of different translations of the Bible that you can use. So perhaps if you read a passage that you don't quite understand first of all, or is difficult to follow, you can change to a different translation that might give you a different point of view to help you to really understand what that text is talking about. So for me, I find that the most quiet place I can find in my home is an office, sit in the chair. I have the resources that I need. Again, a notepad, a bit like when I pray, it's the same kind of thing. Have a notepad handy to write down any notes that might occur to me throughout. I like to pray before I read the passage to make sure that it's God helping me to understand it rather than me trying to understand it with my own brain, and helping him asking him to help me to follow what his message is through that text. I try to read it through slowly. I think sometimes in the morning you can be in a bit of a rush, so you do tend to perhaps push through and read faster than you might ought. I think it's always better to slow down, read more slowly, and I think also there's some pressure sometimes to read a whole chapter or a bigger chunk of text, and that isn't always right. I think it's better to read until you feel like God has spoken to you or something stood out to you and you've enjoyed. Maybe that's 2 verses in, maybe it's 2 chapters in. I don't think there should be a set or fixed amount necessarily, unless that works for you. You do have these Bible reading plans that you can follow as well. Some people find that really helpful, some not so much, but again, if it works for you, then that's great. So for me, I sit down, I read the passage through slowly, and I tend to pray about it afterwards and ask God to kind of show me what it might have meant to the original people who would have been reading this or hearing this for the first time, and then what does it mean for me now here in the 21st century, and what does God want me to do with that truth? Yeah.
And just to say, by the way, would your reading the Bible time and prayer time normally go sort of together?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think they do blend into one into the other really. I think there are times when I sit down and pray without my Bible. There are times when that happens, and I guess there are times when I sit down and read my Bible without praying. But I do tend to bring the two together if I can.
Yeah, and I think that is very much how I work as well. And I think often reading the Bible kind of feeds into prayer. And there'll be things that I read in the Bible which lead into my prayers. I also really like what you say about, not feeling like you have to read a certain amount. I've been reading through Ephesians recently. I think I might have mentioned that last week. And the particular resources that I'm using, and we'll talk about that in a moment, it just goes through, we've been going through it very, very slowly, just like 2 or 3 verses at a time. But I've really enjoyed that slowly working through the Bible. There are other times, a couple of months ago I did Judges, and we went through, a chapter at a time. And you have to read the Old Testament, I think, those bits in larger chunks. But actually, it was really good to do that too. So, small or large, it's what fits with you in your kind of...
Yeah, and I think you've something really important you said there about it depends on what kind of text you're reading. So if you're reading perhaps a historical account from the Old Testament, you might need to read a larger chunk, whereas if you're reading one of the New Testament letters, a smaller chunk might be sufficient in that to kind of more than enough to kind of get you through the day and to think and apply. So it does depend on the kind of book that you're reading within the Bible.
Yeah, definitely. So are there any particular resources that you might recommend? Are there any you find helpful or that you might like to suggest to people when they're getting going reading the Bible?
Yeah, so I think for me, a quality set of Bible notes can be really helpful if you're just starting out. I think some parts of the Bible are quite difficult to understand, even for people who've got theology degrees and things like that. There's lots of debate about what different passages mean. So if you're starting out for the first time, then it can be very daunting. So it's helpful to have a set of Bible notes that you can have alongside the passage that you're reading to kind of guide you through. It might give you some questions to think about. It might tell you a bit of the background of the background to the passage. I use a particular one called Explore, which I find really helpful. But there are lots out there. There's also different apps on phones and things that you can use which have sort of notes or questions. The quality does vary depending on which one you use, and even studies, there's different quality and things out there. But as I say, I think if I was starting for the first time, I'd want to read alongside some notes that kind of helped me to understand the passage. I think if I was to read for the first time, I usually recommend perhaps the book of Luke and the book of Acts as a kind of a pair. They kind of go hand in hand, part 1 and part 2 of the story. The book of Luke covering Jesus' birth and his life, his ministry, and then obviously his death and resurrection. And then the book of Acts covering the early church and the birth of the church and how the message of Jesus was kind of spread out across the world, really. So they're good places to start, I think, personally.
Yeah, definitely. And starting with the Gospels, I think, obviously, and we looked at this in the first session of this course about following Jesus. And following Jesus is the core of Christianity, isn't it? And you can never go too wrong when you're actually just focusing on Jesus and what he said. Because I think everything in the Bible really is in what Jesus said and did.
Yeah.
It sums up everything else.
Yeah.
And for me, I like to come back to the Gospels regularly. I think in our old church, we used to try, in preaching, we used to try and do a third Gospel, a third Old Testament and a third New Testament, called the rest of the New Testament. I think that's quite a helpful balance actually for our own Bible reading as well. Think that you don't read exclusively the Gospels, don't read exclusively the Old Testament, try and get a balance of old and new and the Gospels thrown in there as well.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I think the Old Testament can be more difficult to handle at times, although there's some difficult places in the New Testament as well, of course. But I think you're right. I think my advice would be not to read it like you would read a novel or a book going from start to finish. Don't try and do that, because I think that's particularly if you're starting out for the first time, because that's you're okay with Genesis perhaps to begin with, and then it gets harder as you get into Exodus, and then even harder when you get into Leviticus. So I would say, I think what you're saying is understanding the context from the Old Testament and the culmination in the New Testament, but particularly focusing on the Gospels can be really, really helpful.
Sure.